Hi, everybody, and welcome to Getting Inside the Right Male Mind with Benjamin and Lisa Shield. It is our pleasure to be here with you today, and we are so excited about the topic. It's about what women say and what men actually hear. Which is going to be a word. I'm going to use a word I never use. This is going to be a very juicy topic. And I think that it is so important that women hear this because we just go unconscious sometimes and we sit across from men and we think we're making a connection because we're talking and, there's conversation, but very, very often men don't call us back. And the reason they don't call us back is because we are not conscious of some of the subtle things we may be saying and doing in conversations with men where they're listening, they're trying to be polite, they're trying to stay present and track us and all. But in their brains, in their minds, they're actually tuning us out, or they're just trying to be patient. Benjamin will talk more about that. But it's important to really stop and think about how you may be alienating a man with your conversation and not even know it. You cannot talk to men the same way you would talk to your girlfriends. It just doesn't work in the same way that we get upset and frustrated with men when they are talking to us in the same way they would talk to their guy friends. Mm-hmm. So this is something that should be modified on both ends. Today, we are just looking at the male perspective. So don't think, when Benjamin and I share these conversations that we're just talking about how women have to change to accommodate men. All we are doing here is helping you understand some of the ways you can change or you can modify your behavior to get better results on dates if you want to, right? If you choose to do this. You don't have to, but we are trying to expose some of the disconnects that happen through these conversations that Benjamin and I are having. So, babe, and I know I did this a lot when you and I first met. I would sort of go into a monologue or into a conversation about something I thought was incredibly fascinating. And I may have felt like I was sharing myself with you and connecting with you, and your eyes were glazing over.
Well, there were moments early on that I felt like a captive audience where you were so excited about something that I wasn't particularly excited about. You were getting your degree in spiritual psychology and wanted to read me something. And I may have had another agenda, or I may have wanted to talk about something else. So, it was kind of more like witnessing than being in a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I might have been sharing something I felt very passionate about and that I was excited about. But I also think there were other layers to how I was talking and what I was presenting. I wasn't coming to you to get your input or have a discussion about some of these subjects. It was almost like I could have been standing up on a podium doing a lecture, right? And you would be sitting there listening, but there was nothing to say.
Right. It wasn't so much that you were talking with me, you were talking to me.
Or at you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember one date or one relationship that broke up because this woman was so excited about something she read, a course she was taking, and she'd be reading me something. And I remember the last night we were together in a relationship that she was reading something and it was going on. And I was just thinking, how much longer? And I started, I would like to say unconsciously, but it was probably conscious. I was slowly moving towards the door. And she saw this, and she said, you're moving towards the door. I'm reading this to you and you're moving towards the door. That was it. I think I just couldn't I didn't know if it was appropriate to interrupt her or if it would be insulting, but it was probably more insulting to just move slowly towards the door and think that I could slip out unnoticed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So what I get from this is that there are ways in which women unconsciously alienate men in conversation. And you said something earlier when we were putting this all together that there's no entry for a man in a lot of these conversations, that they sit and listen, but there's nothing to say. I mean, sometimes the subjects aren't interesting to them, or they just have no connection to the people or the situations. Like, she may be telling you stories about relatives or friends, and you're just sitting, you don't know these people, you have no context for any of it. And she feels like she's pouring out her heart to you, but you're sitting there going, and what am I supposed to do with this?
Well, there's a difference between pouring one's heart out, which can bring people together, and hearing something that may not have a lot of emotional content, even though it may be emotional subjects. Yeah, and so it also, you don't know if someone has told this story. If you've ever been to a party and someone kind of latched on and is telling you a story, and you have a feeling they told the story at 50 other parties, and it leaves a person empty.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a repertoire of stories that someone has in their database.
Yeah.
And then they just start telling them. Your mother was a wonderful example.
Oh, absolutely. I think it comes from nervousness, insecurity, and being uncomfortable with silence, and really not knowing what to say or how to connect with someone. So, but it has the opposite effect, because even silence could be more bonding than someone hearing, whether it's a man hearing a woman or a woman hearing a man, because this could be interchangeable. And I have to say that many of the women that we've spoken to have been on dates, and the man has done nothing but talk about himself for 2 hours, and the woman couldn't get anything edgewise. So it can go both ways. And this also isn't to discount some of the very meaningful, deep, vulnerable conversations that could happen on a first date,
right?
Or any date. But it's talking about, just for the moment, talking about a man listening to a woman, because again, it can go both ways. And it could be when a man is talking about himself for 2 hours and then says goodbye, he's trying to prove himself, or he's going from date to date telling the same stories and looking for adoration.
Yeah.
And I think when a woman speaks to a man, she's really trying not so much to talk about herself. And I think men can be guilty of talking more about themselves. But a woman will often be saying something that's on her mind, and it could be teaching or interviewing or lecturing, and it's a bit different.
Yeah, let's tease out that difference a little more. What is different about it?
Well, I think you could relate more as a woman.
So for women, I think our goal is to make an emotional connection. That's really our deepest desire, is to connect with you emotionally. And we don't know how to do that. And so we overtalk, we teach, we lecture, we get frustrated because we don't know how to do it. And we talk a lot, and we overshare sometimes because we're just trying so hard to connect with you. And it's why I wanted to have this particular conversation, because I think it's important. How do we connect with you and not push you away? Yeah. Because I see a lot of that. And let's talk about these ways, babe, that women do this, because I think it's good to give people very specific, ways that women alienate men in conversation.
Well, first, I think in any conversation, almost any conversation, there are two conversations going on at the same time. There's this, as you pointed out, this need for connection, this heartfelt need, which is why people are on a date to begin with. They're looking to find the guardian of their soul, their soulmate, someone that they can relate to and they can grow together. And the other conversation overlays it. And that's sometimes busy talk, inconsequential subjects that really distract and rather than bring people together. So, some of the ways, and again, this can be reversed. We could be talking about what a man does and what a woman has to listen to on a date. But for this conversation, and that certainly may be a future talk, but for this conversation, sometimes things that kind of make a man's eyes go glossy is on a date if he feels like he's being interviewed. That as opposed to things being off topic and, meandering, things could be too pointed. What was your last relationship like? Why did it break up? What did you do wrong? And are you ready for another relationship and all that? And a man could just feel pinned to the wall. And so instead of being able to have a deep conversation about it and let things unfold, he'll usually give very brief answers and sometimes defensive answers.
And why does that make a man feel pinned to the wall?
Well, I think a man, first, if he's answering questions that may create shame, shame is perhaps the worst thing a man could feel. So if he's asked about the past relationship, it may bring up shame while it was a failure. It may bring up resentment or longing, and suddenly his mind is out of the conversation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Other things like teaching. Women can start teaching men.
Right.
Or trying to.
And I think the example early in this talk about you reading me something that you were deeply excited about, or the relationship that ended that night many years ago, that women may be, or a person, but women may be excited, really excited about something they just read. But a guy may have had a long day. He may have just would like nothing more than just to kind of be on the couch with his girlfriend, his date, his partner, and just chill. And to try to focus on something, and also to try to match her level of enthusiasm, because if he doesn't, he just seems bored, which would be more honest. But, when someone is reading something or on a roll of teaching something, it's very difficult to interrupt that person, if there's no entry, if it's not a conversation. So a man will just kind of witness and, just hope that he gets some points for it. It's often not the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and also I think when women start teaching, they feel superior. I'm also not just thinking of reading something that I was excited about, but actually going into teacher mode.
Right.
Right. Where I'm teaching you, which also feels demeaning and condescending.
It does. It does.
To a man when a woman does that.
Yeah. And it's very different if there's a conversation and someone brings up something and the man can respond and the woman responds, and it's an evolving conversation where two people share their views but also learn from each other and also are willing to change their views. But if something is just like read to them, or if there's a dissertation, there's not that opportunity.
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. And then a big one, your mom monologuing.
My beloved mother, who's really was a wonderful mom,
Smart as could, intelligent.
She's passed on a few years ago,
Yeah.
but we would talk every Sunday on the phone, and without exaggerating, I would put the phone down, go into another room, do something, wash some dishes, check on something, and go back and pick up the phone and say, uh-huh, and then put the phone down again and come back, and she'd still be talking. And, there's just no entry. There's no conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what was your joke, honey, about that?
Oh, my joke was that when someone goes, there should be a 12-step program for when people talk a lot, and that 12-step program should be called On and On and On.
On and on. Yeah. Yeah. So that was your mom. And that was sort of that instance that you gave earlier about, me, or like just getting on a subject and talking. Yeah. Another thing women do is lecture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And men, a grown man, or even a young man, kind of bristles at being lectured of how things should be, what someone may have done wrong, or what another person may have done wrong. It's just again, it's not conversational. It doesn't bring two people closer together. In fact, it actually drives a wedge in the conversation.
Well, especially if you're lecturing like a mother would lecture a little boy, it's infantilizing. It really, it's a terrible, terrible thing to do with a man.
Yeah. And for all these things, if a man extrapolates what the relationship is going to be like 5 years later, he doesn't want to be with someone who is lecturing or teaching or monologuing.
Yeah. Another thing women do, guilty, is going off topic.
Right.
Whenever we're doing these talks, in the back of my mind, I'm like, whoops, there I go.
Right.
Am I going to come back? Is he going to be able to follow me?
Right. Yeah. Sometimes we just kind of watch the conversation fade off into the distance, as it veers off, and sometimes it could feel like you're playing catch and you throw the ball to someone and they throw it somewhere else.
In a completely different direction.
Right.
That's hilarious. And because women do this a lot. Like, this is probably the hallmark of, men are linear thinkers and women are like, whoop, whoop, whoop.
Yeah. And a man just wants to grab the conversation and bring it back in because he has no idea where it's going or why the discussion of someone's great aunt, has anything to do with what we're just talking about, and going off into other subjects.
In fact, that brings up the Dave Barry conversation, right?
Right.
So there is a fabulous piece that was written by Dave Barry, who's a comedic writer, and it's called The Difference Between Men and Women. And it's wild. I mean, just look it up, Google it. It's worth reading. We won't take the time to do that right now, but it really is exactly about this. Well, not exactly, but read it. It's hilarious. All right. So another one, well, the going off topic, I really want to explore that a little further because it's a big one.
Right. And when someone goes off topic, and for our example, if a woman is going off topic, a man begins his own internal dialogue. It's not that, because it's hard for him to follow it with a more linear mind. So he just starts thinking about other things, and just to fill up his mind. And it's, again, like two avatars, two people who aren't really present. She's not present entirely with him, and he's not present with her. So it's almost like two holograms having a date rather than two real people having a bonding interaction where they leave fulfilled and closer together.
And men really get lost. They're just, we accuse them. I think a lot of if you think of couples, the woman is like, "You're not listening to me." And the guy is like, "I am, but I have no idea where you're going with this."
Right.
Right?
Right. And in my parents' case, my father literally wasn't listening. We have no history of deafness in the family of any generation. But my dad lost much of his hearing. Early. And I think he willed it.
He what?
Willed it.
Willed it. Oh my.
It was his answer to his prayers.
Yeah. Well, your mother, she would even talk on the inhale. Do you remember?
Exactly. And she would speak on the exhale and then hum on the inhale.
Oh God.
She just couldn't handle silence. And it was a nervousness and I think a wanting to connect,
And your father was just so silent.
Yeah.
And the more silent he was, the more talkative she was.
And then the more talkative she was, the more silent
he
became.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of men can feel, that if a man is patient and listens to a woman and her conversation may go on, like her monologue may go on, he may just not have an entry to discuss his own feelings, and he may just begin to stuff them. I don't think my dad ever discussed his feelings, deeper feelings, the more superficial things. But I think after a while he just tucked them away, and then it became even inaccessible to himself.
Wow. How sad.
Yeah.
I mean, they really, if you sit back and study their dynamic, so much of it had to do with the things we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
Your mother's lack of consciousness of, what she was doing, and your father's inability to articulate what he needed.
Yeah, the relationship would have been so much different if my mom would have approached my dad and said, "I had this interesting thought, and I'd love your opinion on it." That would wake him up. But it was more like, "I have this interesting thought, and ... and he was just witnessing, but he was never really invited into the conversation.
Yeah. And I don't think he knew how to talk to her and let her know.
Right.
He couldn't articulate his feelings about what his needs were. That's where therapy comes in.
And so on a date, even though, we're not talking about a long-term relationship,
right?
Even on a date, there's nervousness, there's anxiety, there's projections, there's expectations, there's all of this. And that both people feel that they need to be on. And it leads to stories, it leads to going off topic, it leads to extended lecturing or talking that isn't really a conversation.
Yeah. Yep. Wow. So another one that you said, or that we wrote down, is dwelling on the negative.
It happens. And sometimes on a date, the easiest thing for someone to talk about are things that are going wrong. Why they are having difficulties with their brother, or why they hate their boss, and can just go on. And it just cycles
it's numbing.
It's numbing, and it grinds the conversation down to a lower level. And there's really nothing one could, the man could be empathetic, but he's really a witnessing more than participating.
Yep. There's another one, which is over processing.
Right. Right. We don't, I mean, we have very deep conversations, and we also have a lot of fun, and a lot of joking, but we don't do a lot of processing. Um, I think we both had enough of that in New Age workshops and
Therapy and old
yeah,
relationships.
yeah. I mean, when we first got together, I think I may have subtly asked what you were looking for, what you wanted. I don't think it was a direct question. And you had the best answer. You had the best answer. You said, I've done a lot of work on myself. I've done a lot of processing. And now I'm just looking for, a wonderful partner to have fun with. And at that moment, I silently put my hands together and said, thank you, God. And we've been together ever since. You left after that first date. You had things to do in Southeast Asia, business and pleasure. And I marked the day that you came back. We've been together ever since. But that one line that, we're not going to be processing, the idea that relationships have to be about working things through and getting to difficult things. And I think it was in the Book of Miracles, is it?
A Course in Miracles.
Course in Miracles, where it said you could either learn from
Joy
or pain. And in our relationships, we learn from joy.
Which is interesting because your mom's name was Joy and my middle name was Joy.
That's right. Technically, her middle name was Joy.
Yes, she changed it.
Yeah.
She changed it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we learned through a lot of joy. Over processing or processing for women, it's something that, it's almost like the fish doesn't realize it's in water, right? And we don't realize that we are processing. We can't see it because it's really how our brains work. And so sometimes, now I'm much more aware of it. And you're so sweet when you will say to me, you're starting to process, or maybe you need to call a girlfriend or whatever. But I didn't even know. I started to realize as I looked at my conversations with men that I saw the reactions from men, and I was like, oh, okay, you only should really say something once. Not more than once. They get it the first time. Anything after that is too much. And that men get very frustrated once they've given you their opinion about something, and they don't have anything more to say about it. And we want to go on and keep going, but why? Or why do you think that way? Or, I don't get it. Or I don't agree. So we start processing like I'm doing right now.
And a man just sits there.
And that's a great example of what it looks like. Looking for that foothold, ladies, to get in there.
Yeah. And sometimes a man is witnessing a conversation, and sometimes he wants to come in with a solution, which a woman doesn't want. It often doesn't want an answer.
But that's what men do. That's your natural frequency. Right. That's your knee-jerk response is, she's telling me all this for a reason. I guess she must want a solution.
Right? Yeah. And I think when a man interjects like that, a woman could feel cut off because she's in the middle of something, sharing a problem, a difficult situation, and a man may feel that he sees something very clearly, and will offer a suggestion or an answer, a solution, and the conversation just ends. And both people leave feeling frustrated.
Well, and it's because women, what we want is empathy. We just want you to listen. We want you to feel the emotion that we're trying to convey to you, but it's just not how men work. That's for girlfriend. That really is more for our girlfriends.
And I think that's the difference. If we think about how men are with other men and what their conversations are like, and how women are with their girlfriends and what their conversations are like, that it doesn't always blend well on a date.
Well, and we're not wired to do those things. Like, I'm not hardwired to be linear and one-track minded, and you're not hardwired to be a processor,
Right.
and you know,
4-dimensional. There's 3 dimensions, then there's otherworldly.
But it's just, we're wired differently. And so it's building that conscious awareness of how men and women are different, and then doing our very best in conversation to meet in the middle.
Yeah, and I think one way to meet in the middle is to come from a certain amount of vulnerability that is an invitation for the other person to share their vulnerability, to share something vulnerable, even on a minor level, see how it's received and responded to, and then the conversation gets deeper, the bonding gets closer together, and both people leave the date, the conversation, feeling richer because of it.
Yeah, I like that. All right, repeating old stories.
Right. Sometimes people, men and women, and again, if you've ever been to a party and someone just latches on and you know they're telling you the same story they've said at the last umpteen Christmas parties, and it's wasted time. It's just wasted time. It's interesting to hear people's stories, but it's not interesting if you feel that they've told this again and again, and it's just a default they go to in a social situation.
Yeah, and especially like if you hear a person tell stories over and over again, they often just tell it the same exact way, the same thing. You know, I think it may be okay to tell a story, especially if it's appropriate or whatever. But also, like last night, I'll take last night for an example. I was sharing about a wonderful cruise my grandmother took me on when I was young. But I also think it was relevant to what we were talking about. And I also think I shared it in a fresh way.
Yeah. And you also allowed entry for people to make comments and share something about their own experience.
Yeah, we went into some other stories and then came back. And yeah, it was a wonderful conversation. And it was also, I think in the past, I know for myself, when I would tell a lot of these stories, I was trying to prove something, or I was trying to be sophisticated or well-traveled or cultured. You know, I was trying but the story when I told it last night wasn't from that place at all. It was from humor. It was from the beautiful part about Pat Conroy, you know, when he was sharing about I met Pat Conroy on this cruise ship, but when I was sharing about his experience with his father, there were, you know, the lessons and the beautiful parts to the story. It made it rich. It didn't make it alienating. It brought everybody together and brought the conversation together.
Right.
Yeah. So it's important to some people, like, you feel like they just hit play and they're just repeating a story they've told over and over again.
Yeah. It's not enlivening. It's deadening.
Yeah. And that leads me to another one where sometimes women feel the need to perform. There's like a performance, you know, to the way we show up. And, you know, some women have very big, loud personas and they're performing, and it's not even a real person.
Right. And the man feels that. At first, he may appreciate, you know, like this woman has so much personality, and then he realizes that that person never comes down from that into a real conversation of emotional content and personal vulnerability and genuine excitement about listening to someone else's stories or opinions, that it's this big Agnes Moorehead, Lucille Ball persona.
Yeah, there's a huge persona that you have to get through. And sometimes you walk away on a date, and I think a lot of men will spend quite a bit of time on a date. Women are baffled, but he spent 4 hours with me, and then I never heard from him again.
Right.
And, you know, a man may be on a date and he may find your personality alluring, but then he may be sitting there waiting for it to settle like dust so he can connect with the real you. And that moment never happens. So you don't hear from him again.
Yeah, we've heard that a lot. I mean, women will say, I had this magical date. We went on a walk for, 3 hours. We had dinner for 3 hours, and he never called again. And he may not have felt that he was able to share, or, there may have been multiple reasons, but he just may have felt like, he may have felt exhausted.
Yeah, or waiting for some kind of connection that just he never experienced, and then walked away and thought, yeah, no.
Yeah.
And he gave it his best shot. Another one is being too intense. And I know I am so guilty of this. I mean, for men, when there's no playfulness and, levity, and they just want to relax around us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we want deep conversations, but we want to have fun. And we don't want it to be this intense, situation where it's difficult just to relax and be ourselves.
Yeah, or you get this feeling that there's some kind of underlying anger in a woman, and you can sense it even if she's really, really trying to keep a lid on it, but one wrong move and she's going to let you have it.
Yeah.
That's intense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there are women, I think as we're talking about it, myself included, very tightly wound and scrutinizing, and men can feel those things. They can feel that.
Yeah. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. And it makes us either withdraw or feel defensive, or because we may not feel that same intensity in the relationship. It's great to have an intense relationship if both people feel intense, and it's a very enlivening conversation. But when one person is really intense and the other person isn't, they're beginning to have their own internal dialogue, or just wishing they were somewhere else.
Yeah. And that intensity can be driven by either an anxious attachment style or an avoidant attachment style. But there's just intensity. Yeah. It's, and again, when I'm sitting here thinking about when I was so intense, I was overthinking this. I was so in my head, and it hurt so much that I wasn't having success in this part of my life. And what that did was it drove me to want to control things more. So for a long time, I was very, I could be very hard on men. I was waiting, I was scrutinizing to look for that place where I could kind of dig in and, so that I could tell him how I felt. I was trying to, I don't know. It was not good. It was not good. That's all I can tell you. And the harder I tried, the more intense I got about it all, trying to control it and overthink it. And we have some clients like this who are so intense. In fact, as we're, talking, and I'm thinking about, there's a level of intensity that women do bring into relationships. If you think about some of the women in the course and the overthinking, the overprocessing.
And a lot of that comes from disappointment in past relationships.
Yeah.
That they go in thinking this has to be different. And so I understand that level of intensity, but it doesn't allow for two people to get to know each other in a lovely unfolding way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't. Wow. Yeah, there's a pushing to try to make something happen instead of just permission, allowing, creating that space so that magic can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was something that I had really not thought about for a long time that has come up a lot lately in relationship to intensity is surrender.
Mm-hmm.
Surrendering to the process, to, men, to allowing this to happen, having faith that, it can, but we're pushing, the whole more we hold on tightly, and this has come up, and the intensity just keeps building and building and building.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I think the reason a man wants that special woman in his life is that a woman can offer something that his male friends can't.
Mm-hmm.
It's some magic. And that's why we couple, because a man is seeking something and a woman is seeking something from a man she can't get from her girlfriend. And what a man is looking for, one of the key things, is to be able to relate to the woman in a way that he can't relate to other men. And if that ability to relate is cut off, then the passion, the desire to be in a relationship with someone is cut off also.
And it dies.
It dies.
It dies.
Yeah. And sometimes people still get into a relationship, but the relationship isn't as alive and vibrant as one would have hoped in the beginning.
I want to say that my desire to be a great partner to you, which is huge for me, huge. Like that's one of my greatest wishes in life is to be the most wonderful partner. And I know I did all of these things that we're talking about, all of these alienating behaviors. So teaching, monologuing, lecturing, going off topic, going on and on about things that a man just isn't interested in or doesn't have a reference point to, dwelling on the negative, over processing, repeating old stories. The intensity was kind of gone by the time we met. I'll cut myself some slack there, although I still can be intense. Interviewing, performing, and one we didn't talk about is being a man's therapist.
Right.
That's another one, like a woman trying to be his therapist and feeling like, oh, I'm going to get him to open up. And that's really alienating.
Or I'm going to solve the issue of him with his past wife or with his mother or with his kid or whatever it is that a man doesn't want someone who he may hardly know and hardly knows him to try to give him answers of things that he's been probably thinking about for a long, long time. So it's really being present and resonating, with that energy, with the conversation, and allowing the conversation to begin to seek out answers. But rather than say, what I see is that, and it's just turns someone off and says, oh my God, I don't think I could handle 30 years of this or 40 or 50.
Yeah. No, it's something I think if I've done it, I've done very little of it with you. Yeah. I would never talk to you that way.
Yeah.
I did all the other stuff. But I have to say that my desire to be a wonderful partner because of that, and because that really drives me in this relationship, I've always been open and very open to hearing what you have to say and modifying my behavior in ways that could make more room for you.
Right. And one thing that you don't do, which is wonderful, is interrupt. I mean, it's fine to have a conversation, and conversation is about sharing and interjecting. But if I'm on a thought, you let me finish the thought. You don't jump in and say, "Oh, wait, I have a better solution," or what, And if a man is interrupted, and the same is true for a woman, but if a man is interrupted enough times, he just begins to shut down. Like, what's the point? Or it's infantilizing to keep getting interrupted. And,
talk about that for a second. It's really disrespectful.
It's very disrespectful. And the man feels that. And when a man feels disrespected in something like, as with a conversation, he is on his senses are in overdrive to see what other things he'll be disrespected for. Like, he wants, just like a woman wants a man to deeply care about what she's saying, a man feels the same way. And a man wants to share and wants to grow. I mean, the purpose of a conversation isn't just to be relating things that both people already knew. They know about themselves and issues that it's just not new, or talking about current events, or anything like that, negative thoughts. People want to grow from conversations. They want to leave differently and know that, wow, this is going to be a lot of fun with this person, because it's going to be so interesting to see where these conversations go.
Yeah. Wow. I never even thought about just interrupting somebody, how disrespectful that is. And especially with men, we want them to open up and share with us, and we complain so much that they don't. But I would venture to guess that a lot of men don't share because they did get silenced, they did get interrupted, they got cut off by a mother or by a parent, starting at an early age.
Or long-term relationships.
Yeah, and then going into long-term relationships and all. But yeah, and they just learn that there's probably not, it's funny, I think a lot of women might say to themselves, "Oh, I'm a good listener," or whatever. But you may think that you're a good listener, but there's a difference. Yeah, I think listening is more complex than people really know.
Well, listening is also drawing out in a non-intrusive way. And a subtle way of interrupting a man's train of thought is that if he's sharing something and a woman asks a direct question that may seem more therapeutic or processing than receiving and adding her own level of vulnerability and wisdom. But it's not, there are a lot of conversation enders where a man may have a certain emotional content, and if someone comes back with a kind of a flat question or an answer or solution, it just breaks that emotional content. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the bigger picture thing is we want so badly for men to open up, but I think it's repeated, instances of interrupting, of teaching, of monologuing, lecturing, like doing these things where some men, like your father, just check out. They just turn off because they stop believing that women will hear them.
Yeah.
And I think for the most part, in many, many ways, we need to do a better way of, a better job of listening and actually creating real conversation and room for that to happen.
And one way to create room is silence.
Mm-hmm.
And often people are, men and women, can be uncomfortable with silence, but silence is more of a man's friend because it gives him a chance to process. It gives him a chance to catch up with the conversation, his own thoughts, and really take in what's being said. So for there to be silence, it's not a bad thing. It's not like, oh my God, what do I say next? Or, he's not interested, or he's more interested in, his steak than, but that's not true with a man. Silence can be very nourishing, and it gives him a chance to, catch up with the conversation, think about his thoughts, and move on in his own way, in his own pace, his own natural frequency.
Yeah. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, we want men to open up to us. And I think men want to open up. I think we all want to. I think most people want to be known. We want to be seen. And it's not healthy to assume that we know if we're creating a safe space for a man to share. I think the goal, something women should be asking themselves is, am I really creating a safe space for this man to open up with me? I want him to, but what often happens is we're quick to judge men as being emotionally unavailable. And we assume that we're great listeners. We have an identity around, I'm a great listener. But the truth is, if the flow of conversation isn't happening, and if you're a woman and you're not making those kinds of deep emotion, good, heartfelt, beautiful connections with men, it is important to ask yourself, what am I doing that isn't working? Because we are the common denominator there. And we can't keep calling all men emotionally unavailable.
So if we were to talk about a man and a woman on a date and what makes a good conversation and what allows for a man to open up and share his vulnerabilities to make him more emotionally available, it's really having a good man enters the conversation gently, and unless he's so nervous and anxious, he's performing. And there's a lot of that. There is a lot of
So let me ask you, babe, what would you suggest? Like I'm on a date and there's this guy and he's got a wonderful job, good looking guy, but then he starts doing that. How would I break that? What would I do?
You would just gently find an entry into the conversation and see if you could bring it more from the head to the heart. So if a man's saying, I've done this, I've done that, I've got a boat here, I've got a house here, and a woman may say, that's wonderful. And what is it that you really are looking for? What turns you on? What excites you? And a man may just shift. And it's not so much a direct question like, are you excited about that boat, or does the house really make a difference? But wow, that's wonderful. And what excites you? What excites you about being on a boat? It just sounds wonderful. And then it begins to put him more in his heart than reporting.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful.
And I think if someone is truly, truly in their heart, it's not a long conversation. When someone is in their head, that's when we get monologues and long conversations.
Beautiful. Honey, I think, so the goal is maybe we'll just take another minute or two here and talk about how do we create this connection? Like we talked about how women and men kind of, or especially women, miss the mark with men. But what I'm hearing, and I think what really was the hallmark of our first date, was just authenticity. I mean, we were just in our hearts, both of us.
Right. And we did something that we teach in the course, or we discuss in the course, called being in the bell jar. Or it's become actually a
bell
verb.
Jarring.
Bell jarring. A lot of clients call it bell jarring. I bell jarred him, or he bell jarred me the entire. It's when the two of you are speaking that it's almost as if there's a bell jar over the two of you, and nothing else exists. And when that happens, there's that intimacy that's created. I told the story that I think the very first book that I put together, Healers on Healing, I interviewed this extraordinary physician, and he wrote Anatomy of an Illness, and he cured himself with a very debilitating spinal disease where it actually would freeze his spine, and the doctors told him he had a choice of spending the rest of his life sitting or laying down, but he wouldn't be able to move from either position. And through humor, through his own processes, he healed himself. And they actually made a movie out of it as well, I think called Anatomy of an Illness. And I went to interview him at UCLA, and he had an office. For whatever reason, they gave him an office in the nursing building. And I walked in, and his two assistants, his two secretaries, if you could picture a snowball being shaken, where papers were flying, phones were on hold, they were ringing, and there was so much activity. I was thinking, how am I ever going to hold an interview with this energy? And clearly he was busy. And when I was ushered back into the back office where his desk was, where he was, nothing existed except he and I. No matter what was happening in the front office, what was happening in the world, what happened with him that day, what was on his mind that could have detracted from the conversation, I felt so received. And I don't even remember what was said. I just remember how I felt. And it stayed with me all these years, decades.
Wow.
How it felt if someone just imagined there was a bell jar over the two of us and nothing else existed. And that alone is the beginning of an extraordinary conversation. From the moment you both sit down across the table at a Starbucks or wherever it is, or on a walk, nothing else exists except the two.
All right, everybody. This is Getting Inside the Right Male Mind. Please send us any suggestions that you have for subjects. So you can email me, lisa@lisashield.com. We are looking for topics that you want us to explore. Getting a little hoarse here. God bless hint. We are so send us your recommendations. You can also go to dwdpod@lisashield.com.
DWP meaning Dating Without Drama.
Yes, Dating Without Drama. DWP. Thanks, babe. DWP.
DWD?
DWD. DWD pod@lisashield.com. And then you can go to your favorite podcast. You can rate us. You can like us. We would love that. And then the last thing is, if you would like to learn more about what Benjamin and I do, please go to lisashield.com. Click the button to watch my free 45-minute presentation. I know you'll love it. Women say they learn so much from watching it. And then if you want to, stay to the end where you can book a call with me or a member of my team, and we will show you how you can find a guardian of your soul for the rest of your life. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lisa Shield.
I'm Benjamin Shield.
And this has been Getting Inside the Right